Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider presented by FanDuel. Matthew Coller here along with Manny Hill on this Thursday evening where the weather has finally turned towards spring and it's going to stay that way. We've got March Madness going on and the women's tournament is getting going and it's a great time of year. Normally though, Manny, we're getting into this time of year and going, whew, wow, what a crazy free agency it was for the Minnesota Vikings, and get a little bit of a break and we could all sit back and watch some college basketball, but it really wasn't. It really wasn't at all. The Vikings got a new quarterback and they picked up an RFA tackle and they needed that, and they have a new punter who's kind of an old punter and I don't know is going to be as good as Ryan Wright, so he can hold well, I think, and there you have it. Oh, and they got Carson Wentz back, which was something that was thrown out there by Adam Schefter a couple of weeks ago. And I think all of us, when Schefter reported, went like, oh, like, okay, I mean, I guess so. And today I saw a lot of attempts to make this interesting. I saw a lot of reaches to make this controversial. I saw a lot of, well, I guess they have to trade JJ McCarthy now. And I'm here to make a declaration, Mr. Hill. It's not interesting. It's not controversial, it's not shocking, and it will have no ripple effects whatsoever. Carson Wentz is back because in 2 out of the 4 seasons that KOC has been the head coach, they have ended up with QB3. And you know who QB3 was? It was Jaren Hall, and then it was Max Brosmer. And you know who does not want it to be Jaren Hall or Max Brosmer again? Kevin O'Connell. It works on a lot of different levels where Carson Wentz knows the offense. Kyler Murray does not. It's great to have a veteran around who knows what he's doing, who can help you through that. Also, Josh McCown is here, a very good friend of Carson Wentz's. They played together. The connection between KOC and Wentz was really good last year. I mean, there was that whole thing against the Chargers, but apparently Wentz didn't hold it against him. As he said, he did not. And he's probably the 10th best backup quarterback in the NFL. And if you are saying like, what? No, he's no good. Well, you're right. Of course he's not. But are there other great backup quarterbacks that are running around? I don't think that there are. If Phillip Rivers came back to play in the NFL last year, then there is not an abundance of useful backup quarterbacks. And that's the whole thing. Although, Manny, I do think we might be able to conclude, again, not shocking, that the battle, the real battle, the true competition is for QB2. And not for QB1. So there are all of my thoughts about Carson Wentz, and I would like yours.
So you mean we're not going to break down the advanced punting stats of Johnny Hekker for the next hour?
You know, you bet I don't know them. I know them. I know them. I know where Johnny Hekker ranked by PFF last year, and it wasn't ideal. So let me just say that. But don't mess with me because I might. So get to your Wentz take.
Yeah, I'm with you. When I saw the news break of Wentz returning to the Vikings, I was like, oh, okay. All right. Bringing him back. Why not? Just add another quarterback to the quarterback room. Why not? I mean, KOC said he wanted it to be a competitive quarterback room in 2026, at least going into camp. And you bring in Carson Wentz and you just kind of, again, see what happens. I know listeners and viewers might get tired of hearing me say, just see what happens, but this is kind of where we're at now with this position. You brought in Kyler Murray because it made sense to bring him in. And I think it makes some sense to bring Carson Wentz in because you never know. Things happen. I mean, like you said, we've seen this team get down to playing its third quarterback in 2 of the 4 seasons that KOC has been here. And if that third quarterback is Carson Wentz in like week 7 of 2026, then it's better than Max Brosmer or Jaren Hall. So I think you just kind of take it for what it is. And, if things, a lot of different things can play out over the course of training camp, someone could get injured in training camp and then that makes the competition a lot easier to figure out. So I don't want to call it a nothing burger, but I mean, it is just kind of like, I think you just kind of shrug your shoulders and just say, okay, this makes some sense. And here we go into camp and here we go. This is it. It just is what it is.
And we are well aware that Kevin O'Connell does not mind juggling a very crowded quarterback room, because at one point they had 5 quarterbacks in the room in 2025, if I'm not mistaken, right? Because Brett Rippon was there, and also Sam Darnold, and then you had Daniel Jones coming in. So there's been a lot of quarterbacks in that room before. And I remember when they picked up Daniel Jones, my initial thought was, now, why would you do that? Like, why would you bring in somebody, dedicate any sort of time or resource to working with this quarterback that maybe will sign with you or maybe he won't, and whatever. And ultimately, Sam Darnold just continued to play really, really well. It made no difference at all that, Daniel Jones was in there. He worked with some of the coaches after practice and stuff. He worked on the preparation. I think he was ultimately useful to Sam Darnold down the stretch as another set of eyes who had been in the NFL. And with Carson Wentz, I also think that it's good for JJ McCarthy to have Carson Wentz around, because those guys did click, from my understanding, last year. And he has also been through everything you can go through in the NFL. Wentz has been the king of the mountain. He has had the injury. He has been the guy who grinded out a 9-7 season on a really bad team. He has been traded. He's gone to the bottom. He's been a backup for a championship caliber team that went to the Super Bowl. He's literally done everything. And he also knows this inside and out. I have no doubt about it that Carson Wentz mastered that playbook very quickly as someone who's been around to a lot of different places. And he understands what Kevin O'Connell is looking for in this offense. To me, that is a good resource for JJ McCarthy, not someone that you trade JJ McCarthy because of. And I did see a lot of that. Well, now they're going to trade JJ McCarthy now that Wentz is here. I don't see any real use in doing that unless somebody came by and said, we're going to give you I don't know who's drafting 10th overall, the 10th overall draft pick, or we're going to give you some really high return in draft capital for JJ McCarthy. And if you feel like, this has probably run its course to the end, then maybe you would consider doing that. I think that if there was any consideration whatsoever of trading JJ McCarthy, that it comes at the end of training camp. It would not come now, because you'd have no idea, if you're the Vikings, what JJ McCarthy has been doing, how much better he can improve himself. And that answer might be none, or it might be a lot. I mean, this is his first healthy offseason now in a while. So he has the opportunity to go back home and put in all the effort and all the work into truly mastering everything O'Connell wants. Justin Jefferson has said that he's going to work with JJ McCarthy. Now, I think we're all wise enough to say that you don't go get someone who's been a top 12 quarterback in the NFL 3 times and is in his prime, unless you want that person to be the starter. So you can have, there's going to be a competition. No, not really. But what you want to see from JJ McCarthy is you should be able to beat out Carson Wentz for that number 2 spot pretty handily if you are on the right trajectory. And how about it, JJ? Force the Vikings to feel uncomfortable about the quarterback spot, because you've performed so well behind the scenes, and they just got Kyler Murray. Like, the onus is really on him, but I would want to see it in OTAs and in minicamp and all the way through training camp. I want to get as big of a sample size as possible, because this is something, Manny, people talk about a lot is, well, he's only started 10 games. He's only started 10 games, which I get, but that's actually a negative, because he's been injured so much. And in those 10 games, it hasn't been anywhere close. So you're really not working with a great sample size, and the sample size that you have is quite bad. So show the world that there's more there in this entire offseason before you decide something like, we're just going to do the Trey Lance thing and send him out of here.
Yeah, I mean, listen, JJ McCarthy needs to be pushed. That's just the reality of it. He needs to be pushed. I mean, if we're being honest, after 2024 and the way that season played out, with Sam Darnold struggling the last 2 games and everybody kind of pushing him out the door and, basically anointing JJ McCarthy as the guy without seeing him play a single legitimate down in the NFL, in a lot of ways, he was kind of handed that starting job, and there was just this assumption that he was just going to pick up where Sam Darnold left off, and it was going to be all systems go. And we saw that that wasn't the case, that he wasn't ready. And so he needs to be pushed. He needs to be, I don't want to say he needs to be motivated. I think he's a motivated young player. I mean, I think he wants to be great. He wants to be a very good quarterback in the NFL, but I think a message needs to be sent that, like, hey kid, you got to really work at this. We maybe have made a mistake a year ago of just kind of handing this to you and anointing you without you having really earned it at that point. Now you got to really earn it. If you're going to be the guy, you got to put in some serious work. You got to get in the lab and get this thing going. And if you do that and then you perform well, it translates to the field in practice, in preseason and everything, then you're going to have a chance and an opportunity for some success. It's going to take a lot, I think, to certainly surpass Kyler Murray, but I think you have to let them know, like, hey, dude, nothing is guaranteed in this league. And just because you were the 10th pick in the draft, just because you won a national championship at Michigan, and just because we handed you the job last year without you really having to put into work to really earn it, it's going to be different now. You got to go up. You got to go out there and you got to perform. And I think, bringing Carson Wentz in there is going to push him a little bit. The other part of this, if things play out a certain way in camp and JJ McCarthy does sort of beat out Carson Wentz for that number 2 spot, guess what you can probably do? You can probably trade Carson Wentz to somebody else that, you're not going to get a high draft pick for him or anything like that, but you can probably ship him off somewhere at the end of camp and get something in return for him. So to me, it makes a lot of sense. And I don't really understand why so many people are up in arms about it.
Well, people might laugh at you saying that and then forget that they got a 5th round pick for Sam Howell after one of the worst training camps. Wasn't the worst. There's some few nominees for that at quarterback, but it was one of the worst, and they still got a 5th round pick for him. That's how quarterback desperate teams are. Though I think the QB3 thing is very real. I mean, Kyler Murray has had some injuries, and we know that JJ McCarthy has had some injuries. So you would want your quarterback 3 to stick around. And also, I think just be there for Kyler Murray throughout the season. It's great to have someone in that room who knows just as much as you or more about how the system works and just the NFL in general, defenses, how to read certain things. I'm not sure how often Kyler Murray even ever had that in Arizona. When we go through the setup and the things that he had, there's not a lot to write home about outside of when he had DeAndre Hopkins in terms of coaching and the scenario and situation. So I don't even remember who their backup quarterbacks were, but I don't know if there was ever someone in there who was kind of his equal at one point, a former high draft pick, somebody who had won stuff in the NFL, not necessarily Super Bowl that was won by Nick Foles, but who has kind of been to the top and been back down. I think that helps for Kyler Murray as well. And if Wentz wins the job and JJ McCarthy is in the press box, then it will be unbelievably clear where things stand and what they think about JJ McCarthy. But if they end up either keeping 3 active on game day, maybe unlikely, but you have the emergency guy who's going to put his pads on over there. But if that ends up being Carson Wentz, that would show an immense amount of trust for JJ McCarthy to be the backup quarterback to come in and potentially win them a game. And that's what he has an opportunity here to earn. And so now it's kind of baby steps. But to your point, I do think last year that, and entitlement is just such a word that is like a heavy word. And it feels, it's sort of the same thing with immaturity. Like when you say entitlement or immaturity, they're just hitting someone with a sledgehammer. And I don't mean to do that. I mean, this is sort of what happens with people who have never failed ever before. There was some entitlement probably with Kyler Murray, and I know this offense and I don't have to do this or that. And I just see it out there and I'll just scramble early in his career that eventually in 2024, he had to go back to the drawing board completely and really learn from top to bottom an offense. So everybody gets humbled at some point in the NFL. Patrick Mahomes missed the playoffs last year. Like nobody gets out alive in the NFL. So when I say the entitlement part, at the end of the season after the last game, in McCarthy's last press conference, he was asked, like, do you think you've done enough to be the QB1 for next year? And he said, well, I think I did. And it was like, can you point to it with your hands for me? I mean, obviously not, since we're asking this question and your head coach is not committing to you. And I know it's right after a game and it's not an answer that what is he supposed to say is fair, right? But also it was sort of like, well, I'll dance into the end zone if I want to dance into the end zone. And I think I've earned the QB1. And you go, hey man, this is a production based league. This isn't a promise in the future based league. And they have certainly showed that to him now. So he's going to have to come in with a lot of humility, but I think that that's a hard lesson most NFL players at some point have to learn. They all have their welcome to the NFL type moments, and it's welcome to the NFL. If you play like that, someone else will be the starting quarterback, and that's going to happen. But this, I think, Manny, right here is going to be the most important. How many months? When do they show up at OTAs? Like April, maybe, whatever. Call it like four or 5 months of JJ McCarthy's entire career, because you can really take two different paths and we have no idea which one he's going to take. You can have that same sort of, I've done enough to be the QB1 and, oh, okay, they're haters or they've fallen out of love with me and that's not my fault or whatever. I've seen a handful of free agents who signed with other teams who said, yeah, well, my new team's going to use me the right way. Like, oh, okay. All right. Your other team was just a bunch of morons, I'm sure. So anyway, like I think Quay Walker said that, like, I don't know if the Packers were a really dumb franchise, but anyway, are you going to have that attitude or are you going to have the attitude? And we've seen this from some backup quarterbacks before, that's for sure. Or are you going to have the attitude like, I better wake up. Whatever work I thought I was putting in, it's got to be a lot more than that in order to perform at a level that has KOC saying, I want you as QB2 on game day. I just don't see a world where he could perform well enough in these practices to not have the guy who's been a multiple time Pro Bowler as the starting quarterback that KOC reportedly said, you might be our multi-year quarterback. I don't see that world, but I do also see a world, Manny, that if he's ready to go and Kyler Murray gets banged up, which he has been known to do, that JJ McCarthy comes in there and shows what he is. So the way he approaches this, I think will tell us a lot about what he's going to be in the future.
I think the biggest thing for him is I think he has to embrace this challenge. He's being challenged now. He's being tested. His very livelihood as a viable quarterback in the National Football League is being put to the test now over the next 4 or 5 months, as you said. This is an opportunity. This is the first real sort of adversity. I mean, you could say the injury in 2024 that wiped out his rookie season. You could point to that as a point of adversity, but this is like on the field adversity where you walked in, you were handed this job, in year 2, despite missing all of the year before, and it didn't go well. And I'm sure you thought it was going to go really well, and it didn't. And this was after, 2 years in college where I think you lost 3 games total in college and won a national championship. So everything was pie in the sky, playing at Michigan and getting drafted in the top half of the first round. And then everything got real for JJ McCarthy in 2025, where it's like, hey dude, no, this is, you gotta really bring it, and you got to get in the lab and you got to get to work. And how he handles this is really going to decide whatever direction, his career is going to go, like you said. So I think he needs to embrace this challenge and use it as fuel, use it as motivation. We always hear about these professional athletes that something happens in their career, typically early on, that really kind of changes their outlook on everything. And it kind of opens their eyes like, hey, this could go away pretty quickly, whether it's an injury or if I just don't put in the necessary work to really get to a high level. It can all go away just like that. So I think he should embrace this, let it feed his competitive spirit that he has. And, if everything goes well and he really puts in the work, he's got an opportunity to really kind of turn things around, but it's not going to be handed to him this time, obviously, with the bringing in of Kyler Murray and with Carson Wentz kind of sitting there saying like, hey, dude, this is serious. You better get to work.
So for the record, would you trade JJ McCarthy?
No, not right now. No. I mean, depending on what happens in training camp, maybe explore it. But I think as of right now, I'm not thinking about that because a lot of things could happen in training camp. Somebody could get hurt, and then you're really screwed. So I wouldn't even think about doing it right now.
For the Vikings, a quarterback getting hurt.
We've never seen that before.
Training camp? I don't know about that, Manny, but here's the only scenario that I would trade JJ McCarthy. If he was around the team and was just not putting in the work that you want, and I don't expect this from McCarthy. I mean, like, we know that one of the main reasons he was drafted was the personality, the energy, the enthusiasm, the work ethic. And I think that one thing is, we saw this from really Caleb Williams, his first year, even just knowing how to do the right work can take time for a young quarterback. I think I was probably snarky about it, and maybe Caleb Williams deserves a little bit of that for, I didn't know how to watch film, and like, hey, well, you have free will. You could go maybe figure that out. But then you realize, and you and I have both had interns in the past, you realize sometimes that young people, they don't know the way, and they don't know how to do these things themselves. And sometimes you don't even think of stuff that you're like, oh, that's right. You might not really realize that. But if he did come into training camp, into OTAs with a completely different attitude than we've seen from him before, because I've never, at least my standpoint, felt like it was an attitude issue for JJ McCarthy, which is why I've continued to say that I think he could be a successful quarterback at some point. It's really a throwing issue and a timing issue and a touch issue and a knowing how to run an NFL offense issue. And I'm watching Kyler Murray tape, and they run a motion where the snap has to happen as the guy is starting to kind of curl upfield, which you're not really supposed to do, but you could get away with it if you time it right. And Murray's doing it like every play right on. And that's a veteran. And that's something that McCarthy couldn't really get down, and they kept having false starts and stuff. And you're like, these are the things that you're going to have to pick up on and learn. I think those are the issues, which are mostly due to experience and not due to attitude. But that can change when your franchise goes out and gets Kyler Murray and brings in Carson Wentz, and everybody's memeing you and everything else. And where does he really mentally stand with this? And if he were saying to the organization, like, get me out of here, or whatever else, then I think you do have to consider it, because the rookie contract has made everything so complicated, Manny. It's like you have this short window to take advantage of it. And then if you don't, it gets very complex after that of how you're going to deal with it. Now, it doesn't make it impossible, but if Murray started most of the year, but you saw some stuff you liked from JJ McCarthy, and let's say you missed the playoffs, but you're sticking with KOC or whatever, you could maybe consider going back to McCarthy, but then you have to have a quarterback competition. And then if he wins it and then plays okay and he's average, because one of the ways people have talked about this who want McCarthy to start is, well, shouldn't we just find out? And I mean, one, we did find out quite a bit last year, but also, well, they're sort of assuming that there's like a high end and a low end, and those are the only two results. But what if you are 8-9 and he throws for 3,300 yards and 18 touchdowns and 12 picks or something? Like, then what? Like, what is even that? What are you supposed to do with that? But the rookie contract ending is looming. So even if you wanted to go back to him and then he did play really well, then you have to pay him, which makes your life more complicated. So this is a situation that is sort of ripe for a quarterback being traded. And that's what we did see with Trey Lance. And we may eventually see with Anthony Richardson. Heard the Packers, or I didn't hear this, I saw this, that the Packers are sniffing around Richardson. No, bad Packers. Back off. We don't need them doing it again. Here's Anthony Richardson in the year 2031 becoming an elite quarterback for the Packers. But I see this as a little bit dicey from that standpoint to how McCarthy could go from where he is now to being a starting quarterback. So the point to draw it all back in was, if they were to trade him, I would not at this moment, but if they were, I would understand, because it's a bigger decision than just, do you like him or could you see him ever becoming good? It's almost, if he does become good someday, that's hard on you, and you will have missed the entire thing that was supposed to help you, which was the rookie quarterback contract advantage. That is the point, that there is a case for that based on team building, not really having much to do with the actual player.
Yeah, and the other thing to think about too is because I've seen a lot of people say, well, now you got to trade him. If you're taking away this opportunity for him to really, compete with Kyler Murray for this starting job, then trade him to somebody who will give him that opportunity. And Collar, you look around the league, if the Vikings were to trade Kyler Murray or JJ McCarthy right now, the only team I could think of where he would have like a legitimate shot to win the starting job is ironically the Arizona Cardinals. It's the only team I can think of because everybody else, even the teams that kind of need a quarterback, I mean, the Raiders are going to take Fernando Mendoza with the first pick. So that's not happening. The Dolphins, even though they pretty much gutted their roster, just gave Malik Willis a lot of money. So that's out of the picture. The Falcons went and got Tua to compete with Penix, and they don't know what Penix's future is going to look like. Like no matter where Geno just went to the Jets. I mean, you trade him somewhere, he's going to be kind of walking into the same, or at least a similar situation that he's in right now. So, I mean, I think you just have to kind of let this thing play out. A lot of things can happen between now and camp. And this is still, I view this as still an opportunity for him to turn things around and get his career, sort of back on track before you get to that point where you're like a Josh Rosen and you're just out of the league after 3 years because nobody thinks you're any good. He still has an opportunity to really kind of get this thing turned around.
The Browns. Do you want to be the Browns quarterback? It would be much better for JJ McCarthy. And that's why I'm saying that this is a really pivotal part of his career. It would be much better for JJ McCarthy if he puts in every ounce of work and makes it hard on the team to make a decision at the end of 2026, because if he wants to force his way out and he doesn't put in the effort and they trade him to the Browns, good luck, man. Good freaking luck.
Could you imagine all of the JJ McCarthy fans going at it online with all of the Shedeur Sanders fans? That would be get your popcorn out.
And at the end of the day, they'll win 5 games and be the same freaking Cleveland Browns, but they'll have had fun on the internet, which they did last year complaining about Kevin Stefanski or whatever. But yeah, I mean, is that the environment you want to go to? And there aren't many other teams. I guess you could say Pittsburgh. I don't know what they're doing. I'm assuming that Aaron's coming back to Pittsburgh, and that's why they've been inactive. I saw there was a report today from Andrew Filipponi, who's a radio host there, that they did not inquire about Murray. But I also think that no one inquired about Murray because he was going to be a Viking. Like, it was sort of out there already. Everyone knew. Every NFL insider, when he was officially released, was like, yeah, Viking. It was a formality that was happening. So I don't know how many other teams really checked in. There were apparently teams checking in about him in 2027, which I think maybe shows that there are teams that think he's a quarterback that you can win with. But speaking of which, Manny, got 2 other things that I want to get to on the show today. One is we made a promise the other night that you would pick a schedule. And for those, we have a lot of new viewers to the show recently, and which is really cool, and I'm very, very happy about. So if you're not familiar with Manny Picks the Schedule, every week during the NFL season, we will react to the week's games, essentially by having Manny pick wins and losses for the Vikings schedule. And over the last couple of years, it has been quite a journey from week 1 into week 17 of watching you either be super high or super low or whatever and come back to, I think last year when they were 4-8, I think you picked them to win 5 and they end up winning 9. And, it's just bounced all over the place. The 14 win season, I think at one point you had them winning 10 and then 15 and all over the place. So we use it as a way to keep track of how we feel about where the team is going. So why not do it after the Vikings have signed their new quarterback in Kyler Murray? Of course, the schedule is not out yet, but that didn't stop me because we know the opponents. So here is the disclaimer, which I will give multiple times for people who are just popping in. This is a fake schedule. The Vikings didn't secretly release the schedule and you missed it. This is a fake schedule, but Manny is going to pick the schedule with Kyler Murray as the quarterback. And here's the assumption, Manny, that Kyler plays at least 15 games. That's the assumption. We don't even have to try to decide, he's going to miss this one or that. 15 games is what Kyler Murray is playing in this schedule that I have made up. So the over-under on FanDuel is 8.5, and I am very curious to see if you get there. So let us begin with game one of my fake schedule for you to pick for the Vikings, but with the proper opponents. The Vikings will open up against the Chicago Bears at US Bank Stadium. Will Kyler Murray, in his US Bank Stadium debut for the team he grew up cheering for, come home with a victory?
Kyler Murray versus Caleb Williams week 1.
I know. That's what I was
Sign
going
me
for.
up, dude.
Like a repeat
Yeah,
of last year, the put it on Sunday Night Football or something. Like, let's go.
Yeah, I could see this being a Monday night last year at Soldier Field.
Yeah, why not?
It was a Monday night game. This could be interesting. I'll take the Vikings to win here in week 1. I think it'll be a little sloppy, but I'll give the Vikings the win here week 1 against the Bears.
Okay, week 2, and the Bears. Real quick, we're just gonna going through the schedule. Let's do this with every team. Just give a little take about their offseason, that kind of thing, because these are the opponents, so they're all relevant to the Vikings. My take on the Bears is, that's it. I thought there would be more.
I did too. I thought they were going to get in on Max Crosby or Trey Hendrickson, and they got in on neither. So I think there is going to be a little bit of a regression from the Bears, just because I think Caleb will be better. I think just because naturally he's going to just be better with more experience. And I think them getting to the playoffs and winning a game in the playoffs last year, I think is big for him and his growth. But they still kind of skated by with some games last year that I think, really helped them get to the playoffs and win the division. And I think there's a little room for a regression here. So I think they'll be good and competitive, and wouldn't shock me if they won the division again, but I think they're going to take a little bit of a step back.
Drew Dahlman, last year, all offseason, we said Frank Ragnow. This is not a household name by any means. I know that our listeners know who that is because they are dialed into the NFC North, and Drew Dahlman was a great center for them last year. Them losing him to retirement makes their life much more difficult, and they have Garrett Bradbury. This is why I want the Vikings to get a 6'4", 338-pound defensive tackle, is because they're facing Garrett Bradbury, and they might for a couple of years. Get somebody that's just gonna shove him back into Caleb Williams. What their regression really comes down to, because they're not going to intercept every pass that comes their way again. It really comes down to how much better Caleb Williams is in terms of being an accurate passer. If he's just okay, they will not be as good. And if he takes a big step forward, then watch out. Okay. Go ahead.
I was going to say, what's Akeem Hicks up to these days?
I know, right? Bring him out of retirement.
Revenge, have him go after Garrett Bradbury again.
All right. Well, so week 2 on this fake schedule with real opponents, the Vikings will face the Buffalo Bills at home. So they start the season with 2 home games. This is going to be a noon one with Spiro Ditas, and I don't know who does the games with Spiro Ditas. Adam Archuleta. That'll be the broadcast crew for this Bills and Vikings matchup, a rematch of 2022's gem, only in Minnesota.
Tell you what, Josh Allen is a much different quarterback coming into US Bank Stadium this time around than he was in 2018. And even then he kicked the Vikings ass still. Leaping over Anthony Barr, that play still just burns in my brain like it was yesterday.
It's one of the craziest things I have ever seen on a football field. Unreal.
And Kirk getting strip sacked 2 possessions in a row. Just that was a rough afternoon. I'm going to give Buffalo the win here. I think we're just going to see Josh Allen do superhuman Josh Allen things, and I'll give Buffalo the win here at US Bank Stadium.
Kyler Murray did beat Josh Allen once was it 2021 where he had the Hail Murray. Yep. That's
right.
What a game that was. Okay. 1-1 makes a lot of sense. Buffalo's off season. They fired their coach. I have no idea what to expect from Joe Brady. They traded for DJ Moore, who I don't think is good anymore, but I also think he's better than anything that they have had, and that it will prove helpful to Josh Allen. I also think they're finally going to draft a first-round wide receiver, despite the fact that their general manager yelled at my old friends on the radio about that, if people didn't see that story. 1-1. at the San Francisco 49ers. And the key here is that all the 49ers are injured because of an electrical substation. Oh, and also they signed every player who has injury problems. Have you seen their offseason? It's like every single guy who's had a lot of injuries, Mike Evans and Christian Kirk. They're like, well, you're not making it better, 49ers. And it reminds me a little bit of last offseason for the Vikings, where, yes, it can help you get a deal if someone has injuries in their past, but also they have more chance of getting hurt again. So out to San Francisco, which has not been a friendly venue to the Minnesota Vikings in recent seasons, but won't be any surprise at all to Kyler Murray, who really should have won his game against 49ers last year, but Marvin Harrison Jr. dropped the footballs. Okay, so how did they do against the 49ers?
Levi Stadium has not been friendly to the Vikings, but it has kind of been friendly to Kyler Murray over the years. He hasn't won every game there, but he's performed well there. I'm going to give the Vikings a win here because I think that, Kyle Shanahan's a great coach, and John Lynch has done a great job just running that organization, keeping them in contention for so many years, despite all the injuries. But I just think at some point, all of these injuries and just the window kind of closing, all these guys are getting older. McCaffrey's getting older. George Kittle's getting older. Brock Purdy is still young. But, you kind of wonder like where his ceiling actually is, when guys are getting so banged up. And they went and got old receivers. Mike Evans, probably a Hall of Famer, but he's just not the same guy that he was for all those years in Tampa. I think the Niners are going to kind of take a step back this year, and I'm going to give the Vikings it might shock some people at first when it happens, but I think later on in the season, people will be like, oh, okay, yeah, that win makes sense.
And Brian Flores vastly outcoached the 49ers last time they played in 2024 and actually really in 2023 as well. That was one of those, Brian Flores knows what he's doing games against that 49ers team. Their key signings in the offseason, Evans, yes, that's a big one. Christian Kirk I mentioned, but what you didn't bring up was the Vidarian Lowe revenge game that's going to happen here. Former Vikings 2022, I think, draft pick, who they got rid of before even playing at all, and signed a nice little contract with the 49ers. But I don't see that as a team that has improved anywhere near as much as I thought they were going to on the defensive side. So they're really just hoping that Nick Bosa being healthy is going to help them. So a 2-1 start to the Kyler Murray era, and now Tua? You talk about a revenge game. It could be Tua and the Falcons coming to US Bank Stadium. Or Michael Penix. We don't really know, but I'm kind of assuming it's going to be Tua as of this moment because of the recovery for Penix. Tua v. Flores. How does this one play out in our fake schedule with real opponents for Kyler Murray?
I still like Kevin Stefanski as a head coach. I still think he's pretty good. It ended badly in Cleveland. But I don't think Tua should be playing football anymore.
I agree.
And I just kind of worry about what this is going to look like. And I think this is going to be kind of a rough year for the Falcons. They have some talent on offense and a couple of nice players on defense, but I just, with the quarterback situation there and them kind of leaning into Tua here, I think it's going to be a rough first year for Kevin Stefanski. So I'm going to give the Vikings a win here.
I could see Brian Flores doing disturbing things with his defensive scheme to Tua. That one is going to be taken personally. When you call somebody a bad person, it's a little bit different from, we just didn't see eye to eye and there were some really rocky times between us. That's the way to normally do that, not come out and say this is a bad person. But the Falcons have not done a lot, and I'm reading off of the Athletics top 150 free agents to just see who teams have signed. Deshaun Hand and Austin Hooper on 1 year, $3 million contracts are the only moves that they've made other than bringing in Tua. So not a ton of movement there for the Atlanta Falcons. Oh, also, by the way, their top pass rusher is in jail. So that is a bit of a problem for them. James Pierce, who they traded up for. We don't even think about the Falcons in the pantheon of bad organizations. We think the Cardinals, we think the Jets, we think the Browns. I'd like to nominate the Atlanta Falcons, post Matt Ryan as being a complete laughingstock. So congratulations to them. Ever since they fired Thomas Dimitrov, it's just gone to complete hell. They have no first round draft pick. They have not a lot of money. They franchise tagged Kyle Pitts, which takes up a huge amount of cash. They don't know what they're doing at quarterback. Yikes. And they traded up for a guy who, by the way, I had heard last year behind the scenes that there was a lot of concerns about James Pierce. As you know from Tennessee, this is a guy who was projected at one point to be a top 5 draft pick. And then all of a sudden it was like, no, he's not going to be. Everybody at once was like, uh-oh, no. And it wasn't because of production. It was because of what everybody knew about him behind the scenes. And now he's got this issue with the police and ramming into his ex-girlfriend's car and all sorts of crazy stuff. And they took that risk. And it ended up, it ended up biting them. So, okay, well, the Vikings, a 3-1 start to the Kyler Murray era. And now Geno Smith, they will face out in New York. Now the Jets, that is a team, Manny, who has, we know the Jets, but I mean, they have got a whole new football team. Let me run through the signings here. Nashawn Wright, Vikings legend, David Onyemata, Demario Davis, Joseph Asai, Dylan Parham, and Kingsley Enagbare. They signed a lot of dudes to the New York Jets.
They have 2 first-round picks too, right?
Yes. Yep. And they have first-round picks, and they have Geno Smith, who is a vast improvement over Brady Cook. So who was the last quarterback for the Jets? But do the Vikings go to the Meadowlands and win this football game?
Well, the Jets have an interception.
Oh, yeah, that's a question.
That will be the biggest question. I think the Jets will be a better team, almost kind of by default because they were so bad last year. But I still like the Vikings in this one. It could be a little sloppy, but I like the Vikings to get a win here. I don't think it'll be particularly competitive. The Vikings are healthy going into this game. I like their chances to come out of the Meadowlands with a win.
So 4-1 start to the Kyler Murray era. Let's hope Call of Duty doesn't come out at this time. Okay, yeah, it had to be said.
Has KOC adjusted his offense for Kyler yet?
Yeah. Can he see over the 6'7" center? Well, I wouldn't be shocked. Kyler Murray has had great starts to his seasons before, and often the issue has been over time that has fallen off toward the end of the season. And some interesting stats kind of being brought up. Seth Walder of ESPN noted last year about just sort of how much was on his plate and how rarely he faced heavy boxes, meaning an extra safety up in the box to deal with the run game and so forth. And then when you look back at his dropbacks and just how much weight has been put on him, he's basically been asked from a dropback perspective to almost be similar to Patrick Mahomes in the amount of offense that just runs through him. And that air raid, that air raid thing early in his career is like that. And I wonder if Murray did get worn down. I mean, not just the scrambling and mileage you put on your body, but also the hits that you take over an entire season, if that wore on him. And it's something the Vikings have to consider. But a 4-1 start with my fake schedule with real opponents would not be all that shocking. They go from New York now to play the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on the road with Kyler Murray as their starter. As if you're just joining, we are picking the Viking schedule that I made up with real opponents with Kyler Murray at quarterback playing at least 15 games.
I'm going to take the Buccaneers here. I think what's going to be interesting to see with Tampa is how much of an improvement do we see from Emeka Egbuka, kind of because he's going to get a lot more targets now that, Mike Evans is gone and moved on. He's really going to become the focal point of the offense for Baker Mayfield. And Todd Bowles coaching for his job maybe in 2026, possibly. I think that's going to be a motivated team. I think they're going to play fairly well, and I'll give the Buccaneers a win here over the Vikings.
Okay. I mean, Baker and Kyler Murray being the same quarterback and the Vikings and Bucks kind of being the same team almost, although, Mike Evans isn't there anymore. So that, Jefferson has the advantage, but a good defensive mind, a good defensive team with a quarterback that is, I don't think there's enough comparisons actually between Kyler and Baker Mayfield. I see it as being pretty similar. They're both undersized. They can both make all the throws. They're both really good scramblers. Probably Baker doesn't run quite as much as Kyler Murray, but he runs a lot. And they also have these ups and downs, these highs and lows. When they're at their best, people talk about them as MVPs, and when at their worst, they're like, what in the world went on with Baker Mayfield at the end of last year? And injuries have played some role. So an interesting battle here. So you're picking the Bucs. That takes them to 4-2. Just in terms of offseason, Alex Anzalone, definitely mostly a Viking killer. They signed him to a 2-year contract. Cade Otton, they brought back their tight end, Kenneth Gainwell, who really crushed the Vikings actually last year. Those are the only major additions to the Tampa Bay roster. Isn't this also a point as we're going through this schedule that the Vikings are not the only team who have kind of sat on the sidelines here? I mean, Tampa Bay, we talked about the 49ers they added Mike Evans, but it's not like they've added way more. It was kind of a lot of the really bad teams soaking up these free agents and not so much the teams that were competitive last year. Versus the Packers. I'm going to say the Packers coming to town here with the Vikings sitting at 4-2 in the Kyler Murray era. Now they will face, it will be actually Jonathan Gannon, who is the defensive coordinator, which is his former coach. So that should be a very interesting matchup. Somebody who knows where the bones are buried, but also is probably not quite as good at his job as Jeff Hafley was for the Green Bay Packers. So do the Vikings get a victory at US Bank Stadium against Green Bay?
I'm going to say no. I'm going to give the Packers a win here. I think it'll be a tightly contested game, a fun game, entertaining. I think the crowd at US Bank Stadium will be rocking. And I'll give the Packers the edge here. The Packers have, off-season, kind of, all right. Zaire Franklin, getting him in, might help that defense a little bit. Obviously, I think the biggest key for the Packers is getting Micah Parsons back and healthy, and he's the key to any sort of success that they're going to have on that side of the ball. And I think this will be, the time of the season, again, hypothetical schedule here that we're dealing with, but this will be the time of the year where Jordan Love, I think, is playing at his best. And I think it'll be an opportunity for a big performance. So I'll give the Packers a win.
I did think about Micah Parsons and putting the Packers matchup when he would be in, because it sounds like the projection is the first 3 or 4 games for Parsons to miss. So I thought, well, let's get Parsons in. So they dropped to 4-3. This sort of tracks with Kyler Murray, who's been hovering around 500 really since his rookie season, and a team that I think is good and has its flaws. They will now go to Detroit and Ford Field and play against the Detroit Lions, which has been, I would not call it a house of horrors all the time. They won last year, but for Kevin O'Connell, it had been a house of horrors before that. Not only the Week 18 game, but remember 2022, where they had that chance to go to Detroit and they threw the pass to Penei Sewell at the end of the game to close that one out. There was the Zimmer's definitely getting fired game that they lost there to the winless Detroit Lions. So I guess it other than McCarthy's win there last year, which we all thought was going to be the turning point of the season, and then they lost 4 straight after that. It's been a little bit of a rough ride. But does Kyler Murray walk into Ford Field and come home with a victory?
It feels like Mike Tyson, Bud Grant are the only Vikings coaches in history that seem to not have any trouble with the Detroit Lions for some reason. I guess Chile did okay with them too. I'm going to give the Vikings a win here. I think it's going to kind of shock us a little bit, kind of like last year's win in Detroit did. It might be crazy to think the Vikings can go into Ford Field and win 2 years in a row, but I'll give them the win here just because, I've already kind of given them 2 straight losses here, and I think they'll pick it back up. And the Lions, I think the Lions are going to be good, but they're another one of those teams that haven't really done a lot in the offseason, and you kind of wonder, it feels like they're just going to kind of run it back. Jahmyr Gibbs is kind of they got Isaiah Pacheco, but I don't know how good he really is anymore. They brought him in as the replacement for David Montgomery, who they shipped off to Houston. It's going to be the Jahmyr Gibbs show, I think, with that running game with Pacheco maybe kind of spelling him a little bit. And we know how talented he is, but this is kind of a different role now where it's everybody's really going to be focused on him in the running game. So I'm curious to see what that looks like, but I'll give the Vikings a win over the Lions here.
Their top 150 free agent signings, Cade Mays, so they have a veteran center there who should be an improvement, but also is not exactly Frank Ragnow. Roger McCreary, who is a journeyman type of cornerback, and Isaiah Pacheco, who you mentioned. So not a huge change, and they're losing DJ Reader. Also, the draft will change things like this, starting lineups, and who knows what first round picks are going to make big impacts and stuff like that. But this has not been a super active offseason for the Detroit Lions. So the Vikings get the win there. They go to 5-3 through 8 games. Something that I realized that I hadn't thought too much about looking through their schedule is that they have 9 home games and only 8 away games. And playing the NFC South, there are some benefits here for the Vikings. Not only that, but they play the AFC East, which has 2 very hard teams, but also 2 teams that are not particularly serious about playing football. So, after they get this victory over the Detroit Lions, they will face the Carolina Panthers. And that is going to be at US Bank Stadium. And Manny, I believe this will be the shortest matchup in history for quarterbacks. I think it will be, right? Bryce Young against Kyler Murray, the shortest matchup in NFL history.
Yeah, that'll be plenty of jokes leading into that week. I think the Panthers won their division with a losing record in 2025, but that was still really cool. And they fell short against the Rams in the playoffs, but that was really cool to see that crowd and that fan base reignited by them getting into the playoffs. And that was a really, really fun atmosphere for them. So they kind of feel like a rejuvenated franchise a bit. And, Bryce Young is not a total disaster like they maybe thought he was a couple of years ago. But I think the Vikings are still the better team in this matchup. And I do like what the Panthers have done in the offseason where they've kind of, subtly improved their roster. And I think they're hoping that some of their young guys continue to grow and develop too. But I still think the Vikings are a better overall team, and them being at home, I think will be in their favor. And I think they'll get the win.
So a 6-3 start would be phenomenal. The Panthers have added a lot of talent. Jalen Phillips, Devin Lloyd, those are 2 of the top 3 ranked by The Athletic. Yep. They get Rasheed Walker at left tackle, Luke Fortner at center, and they bring back Nick Scott. I mean, that's a lot of work that they have put into this offseason, a lot of dollars that they've put into it. I mean, they're feeling that Bryce Young rookie contract is breathing down your neck. So if you're going to spend it now, because if you're not spending it now, then you're going to use your 5th-year option and then see where you're at from there. The 5th-year option isn't really that bad, but you can't move it at all. So if it's $22 million, that is a chunk. That's staying there. That's not something you can restructure or you can void year or whatever, which makes it harder. So you might as well go all in-ish. I mean, it was a big spending offseason for the Panthers, but Bryce Young, Flores defense, we did see this before in 2023, and it was gnarly. It was one of the grossest games you're ever going to see, and Bryce Young was in hell in that game with Harrison Smith coming off the edge. That was the one game where Marcus Davenport was just awesome. You're like, where did this come from? But a 6-3 start with this schedule, and I think not unrealistic. If Kyler Murray at this point through halfway through the season is playing an average version of Kyler Murray, they can get to this point with the rest of the team, assuming health and everything else. The Indianapolis Colts are up next, and Daniel Jones revenge game. The Vikings getting revenge at Daniel Jones because they're mad at him for not coming to the Vikings and saving their tails last year and instead going to the Indianapolis Colts. The Colts are another team that it's funny. Somebody said, I think it was Greg Rosenthal who works for NFL.com, NFL Network. He said something last year that every fan base seems to be very angry with their teams. And I feel like this has been mostly the case in free agency, that maybe Panthers fans are pretty excited because they have a couple guys, but 25 teams are like, what are we doing? Why haven't we done enough? And the Colts, they bring back Daniel Jones at a preposterous contract, 2 years, 88. They top the ridiculousness with signing Alec Pierce to a 4-year, $114 million, and then add Arden Key, who is sort of just a guy. Those are their big signings. And then they send Michael Pittman out, who I thought was actually really good. So he's gone. And here they are. They had drafted Adonai Mitchell. They sent him to the Jets. I really honestly don't really know what their depth situation is at wide receiver and tight end. But they do have Jonathan Taylor, a really good offensive line. But can they beat the Vikings at US Bank Stadium? The last time, quite memorable in 2022.
It was their first win, I believe, over the Colts since 1997, if I'm not mistaken. It had been a really long time since they had beaten the Colts because they never beat Peyton. Yeah, the Colts they made some moves and, kept a couple of their own guys, but they shipped out some pretty impactful players that were huge parts of their success over the last couple of years. And so, is Shane Steichen another guy that maybe coaching for his job? There was some speculation that they might pull the plug on that. I think it was good that they didn't give him another opportunity to kind of turn this around. Yeah, I'm just not sure what they're going to look like, though. It doesn't feel like they're going to be. They've been active, but it doesn't. It feels like everything has just kind of been sort of a push in terms of what they've done at best. So I'll give the Vikings a win here at home, and I think that puts them at 7-3.
It does, 7-3, and we'll make up a fake bye. So 7-3 at the fake bye, a fake schedule, real opponents. And now they will have to go to New England and play the New England Patriots in a joint practices revenge game. I have vowed, Manny, that I will never again make too much of joint practices, that there will be a disclaimer when we go into joint practices. Folks, let's all remember that the Vikings dominated their joint practices, and then the Patriots went to the Super Bowl, and the Vikings missed the playoffs. So we can't make too much of that. That is what you will get from me if they have joint practices this year. But Vrabel versus KOC, two guys who know each other extremely well. Drake May, the quarterback that Kevin O'Connell probably really wanted, and Kyler Murray on the road, maybe in some potential weather here, going to New England as a 7-3 football team. How does this one play out?
Kind of like what New England did in the offseason. They moved on from Garrett Bradbury, but, they went and got Romeo Doubs in free agency. I think that will help Drake May a little bit. I think it's low-key kind of a significant loss for the Green Bay Packers. The Packers never really had a true number one wide receiver over the last couple of years, but, Romeo Doubs might have been the closest thing to that, and them losing him, I think, is going to hurt them a bit. And so I think New England getting him, obviously this is a team that was just in the Super Bowl. And I like what they've done. So I think the Patriots, can't remember the last time the Vikings won in Foxborough. I think 2000, I think it was the last time they did that pre Tom Brady era. So I'm going to give the Patriots the win here. Dropping the Vikings to 7-4.
The thing I'm most curious about is Stephon Diggs was pretty darn awesome for the Patriots last year. Romeo Doubs has had some injuries before at times. In terms of who they've added and lost, they got Elijah Vera Tucker at a kind of a big contract, but he's been hurt. If he's healthy, though, he is a really, really good guard. And low-key signing was Draymond Jones, who's just been one of those consistent quality pass rushers for a long time that no one ever really talks about, but is always good. And Kevin Byard is a safety who clearly no one was really believing that he's an interception machine because he got a 1-year, $9 million contract. But the Vikings 7-4. If they lose to the Patriots. You said loss, right? The Patriots. Okay, so 7-4. And then they will travel from New England. This is going to be a tough run here. Travel from New England to New Orleans to face Tyler Shuck, who, if he was standing in this room right now, I might not know who he is. but he played well enough for the Saints to be pretty sold on him. They went out and they spent, and Travis Etienne, not Etienne, if you missed that, Travis Etienne mentioned that his name has not been pronounced right for his entire career. It's actually Travis Etienne. So there you go. The Vikings were interested in him, but I think he's from the New Orleans area. That is where the pronunciation is rooted in. So he felt like he could finally tell people, this is how you actually say my name. That's a big ad for them in the backfield, and they have been active in this offseason, but can they beat the Vikings at the Superdome?
It's kind of like when we found out it was Javon Hargrave and not Javon Hargrave when the Vikings signed him last year.
I know. When they introduced him, I was on the press conference, and when they introduced him, they were like, okay, questions for Javon. I was like, all right, everybody, hold up. Did you just say Javon? He's like, yeah, it's Javon. I'm like, did you not? And I can't criticize any player because if my name, some people call it Collier or whatever, and I just don't, I'll go on some radio station and they'll be like, all right, Matthew Collier here from Purple Insider. I'm not going to be like, yo, you disrespected my mama's name. But it's like, okay, you just let it go, whatever it happens. But we would vastly prefer to know the correct pronunciations of everyone's name. So appreciate Javon Hargrave telling us that. Jonathan Grenard, he was like, you can call me John, you can call me Jonathan, but do not call me Greenard. We're like, okay. Sir, we will not be doing that. So, and I still hear that sometimes from people, Greenard. But anyway, none of this is the point. In our fake schedule with real opponents, the Vikings are 7-4, and they're going to the Superdome to play a quarterback that we're kind of unsure about and showed some things last year, and a team that we're kind of unsure about, but has enough talent to be at least interesting. Do they win against the Saints?
Ryan Wright revenge game.
Man, it's a loss. I know you keep going back to it, and I feel like you're being a little snarky, Manny, but it's a loss. It's a loss for them.
It's, Will Reichard, how Will Reichard kicks in 2026 is going to be fascinating to watch, because Ryan Wright, in addition to being a really good punter, was also a really good holder. And that goes a lot into how kickers perform. Johnny Hecker do some of the same things. I don't know. We'll see. But the Saints, I kind of like what the Saints have done this offseason. They're another team that's gonna, they're kind of getting out of the salary cap hell that they were in, the remains of the Drew Brees era and all of that. And they spent some money to try and build around another rookie quarterback contract in Tyler Shuck. I like what they did getting Travis Etienne to boost that running game. It's the old cliche, right? It's a young quarterback's best friend is a really good running game. And that's something that they haven't really had. Alvin Kamara is really, really aged and just not the player he once was, 6-7 years ago. So I think this will be a tough matchup for the Vikings. Last time Kyler Murray was in the Superdome, though, to start the season in 2025, he played pretty well, and the Cardinals got the win. I think Kyler will show up and play well again, and I think the Vikings will squeak out one in the Superdome.
All right, so 8-4 then, and to update on the offseason for them, Travis Etienne, David Edwards, guard, they paid him a lot. Noah Fant, who is still around, and a guy who is one of the most underrated signings of the offseason, Caden Ellis.
Yeah,
he played really well for Atlanta. It's just, there are some franchises, and they have absolutely earned this, where players get buried and they can be really good and they would be loved anywhere else and talked about anywhere else, but no one cares. And that is the Atlanta Falcons. No one cares that Caden Ellis was really good last year and signed a nice contract there. I think they will be tough, but the Vikings actually have not been overly intimidated in the Superdome recently. Since the Saints stopped doing the bounty thing, it's been a much more calm and smooth experience. 2020, they gave up 50 points in 2020.
Alvin Kamara, that was a 6 touchdown game from Alvin Kamara, right?
I guess I was
Christmas Eve. Was that like Christmas Eve or something, that game?
Yeah. It was Christmas Day, I think. Was it Christmas Day? I feel like it was Christmas Day. Like, Merry Christmas, everyone. Here's 6 touchdowns for Alvin Kamara. I actually don't think that they've played there since. Am I wrong on that? I don't know that they've played there since.
Probably not. I don't think so.
I was thinking of 2019 playoffs, but then forgot about that. Anywho, All right, so 8-4 now, and they will play at home in my fake schedule with real opponents. The Washington Commanders, another late season battle with them, should be in a much different spot than they were last year if Jaden Daniels is healthy. But also, I mean, kind of an odd offseason for them. They spent a ton of money on Odafe Oweh. They bring in Kayvon Chase on, so they're looking for edge rushing talent. Nick Cross was a guy that I liked. They got Rashad White for their backfield. They've been extremely active. Leo Chanel, another linebacker. So they have really stacked up with defensive players. They put a ton of effort into improving. And Durante Jones is now their defensive coordinator. So from a defensive perspective, very, very different look than it was last year.
I think they got Amik Robertson too. I think they gave him like a 2-year contract, something like that. A familiar face from the battles with the Lions over the last couple of years. Yeah, the Commanders are interesting. This is a home game, right?
Yep.
Different team. I think we're going to see a different team than what we saw in 2025. A healthy Jaden Daniels, I think, will make a huge difference. And I think it'll be a tough matchup. But if this game were in Washington, I would probably give the Commanders the edge. But I think with the Vikings being at home, I actually give them the win here.
Okay, so the Kyler Murray era in your mind
going really well right now.
When I get to the next opponent, you're going to be like, "Oh man, I may have picked too many wins." Because you may forget, if you were trying to aim for a number, you may have forgot this team existed, and you may forget how like this is a lock-in of the century victory. So 9-4, and I think that the Commanders are one of the harder to predict teams of what they're going to be. What does the receiver room ultimately look like for them at the end of the day? Do they add anybody else? Do they draft a wide receiver? Is it possible that Jeremiah Love could get to them? I don't really know what their approach is going to be. It feels like they need another weapon. Their offensive line last year was not great, and then they lose Tyler Biadasz, their center. They decided to move on from him. This defense is being stacked up with a bunch of free agents, which worked for the Vikings once upon a time. Will it work for this team with their new edge rushers? I don't know. Their coverage was not that great last year. And Brian Flores, this is where it really comes down to. Brian Flores really got inside the brain of Cliff Kingsbury, and he may have been fired because of that game. They were so lost against Brian Flores. I do wonder if they saw that and were just like, okay, like this is just not going to work. And you also wonder if they hired Durante Jones in part because they saw how good that defense was. So the ripple effects of the NFL. I feel like Jaden Daniels is going to bounce back really, really strong. And I think they're going to be a good team. I just don't know if they're going to be a great team.
You know who else I think needs a bounce back year for them is Terry McLaurin.
Oh yeah, for sure.
You know, he complained about the contract and they gave him the new contract, and then he came back and he wasn't healthy. And just when he was out there, he wasn't very productive. I know that because I had him on my fantasy team and he did me no favors in 2025. Thanks, Terry. Appreciate it. But yeah, I think they need a bounce back year from him as well, because we've seen him as one of the best wide receivers, one of the better wide receivers in the NFL. And it was not 2025 was not good for him either.
Okay. 3 games left. You know who they're against because it's the divisional games to end the season. At the Packers at Lambeau in December. I decided to make it the Packers' turn to host the Vikings. In recent years, it's been mostly decent weather that the Vikings have gotten to play in. Let's make it gnarly. It is a 9-4 Vikings team going to play, presumably a playoff hopeful Green Bay Packers team. Does Kyler Murray come through in this one at Lambeau?
I don't think so. This is figuring to be a December game at Lambeau, and Kyler has had his struggles when the temperature is below 40 degrees. I would imagine it's going to be below 40 degrees if the schedule hypothetically plays out this way. So yeah, I'm going to give the Packers a win here, and that would mean I believe I have the Packers sweeping the Vikings in 2026,
which could play 2 tiebreakers for the division depending on how these next 2 games play out. So the Vikings currently 9-5 after losing at Lambeau in our hypothetical schedule with real opponents, and now they have to play the Detroit Lions at US Bank Stadium. Let's even put it on Netflix on Christmas Day again. Why not? That worked out great for the Vikings and not America the last time that they played. So do Kyler Murray and the Vikings get to double-digit wins here with a victory over Detroit at US Bank Stadium on Christmas Day? Although they might have been banned from Netflix after this or after what happened last year. I don't know. You are never allowed to come to Netflix ever again with that defense and Max Brosmer. So as long as Max isn't playing, okay, it's fine on Netflix. What do we got?
I think it's safe to say the Vikings will throw for more than 3 yards this time around against the Detroit Lions at home.
There's been some rough Kyler Murray games, but I think he's usually cleared 3 net yards.
Yes. So I have a hard time seeing the Vikings sweeping the Lions 2 years in a row. And I'm going to give the Lions a win here at US Bank Stadium, mainly because I've already given the Vikings a win at Ford Field earlier in this fake schedule. So I'm going to give Detroit the win here.
So now things have gotten very, very interesting for the Vikings as they will play the final game of the season against the Chicago Bears to get to either 9 or 10 wins with Kyler Murray. If I added this up correctly, I think I maybe have, hopefully. If I didn't, I'm sorry. If I missed, did I miss something?
Did we skip the Dolphins?
Oh, I'm sorry. That was a win. I actually did skip the Dolphins because I was like, it's a win.
We can skip the Dolphins.
We literally don't need to talk about it. Like, that's a victory. If you picked anything else, you're trolling. So I'm sorry. 10 or 11 wins. That was the mistake, is I just moved right past them. So 10 or 11 wins for the Vikings. It is at Soldier Field, the last game of our fake schedule with real opponents, with Kyler Murray as the starting quarterback for the vast majority of the season. Do they get to 11, Manny?
I think it's going to be a rough finish to the season. I'm going to give the Bears the win here at Soldier Field. Again, Chicago, week 18, cold, first week of January, presumably, was how the schedule usually plays out for the last week. I'm going to give the Bears the win here in kind of a snot-nosed, low-scoring, kind of nasty game at Soldier Field to end the regular season.
All right, and what we always do when Manny picks the schedule for, again, those new to the program, is we talk about what it would mean if things played out this way. So the Vikings will have a decision to make about the quarterback. We'll also be talking about whether, is it crazy that 10 wins could win the division if they all beat up on each other? It's not that insane that the last game could be, or the last 2 games for the division. 10 is, and I think it is, Manny, the hardest number to work with Kyler Murray. Because if they win 10 and then Kyler goes to who knows where, let's say Philadelphia, and it's like, oh man, got to go to Philadelphia, they're going to get killed, and then plays really well and they win a playoff game, Kyler's coming back. Wait, didn't we just do this? Didn't we just do this like a couple times with Kirk and
2019?
Didn't we just judge someone's future on one game in the playoffs? I don't know if we want to be in that situation again, and yet that's what it feels like. Because if Kyler is leading a 10-win Vikings team and you go to Philadelphia and you lose 32-12, then you're going to be like, it's just not good enough. Just let him go. Draft a quarterback and move on. Or maybe they will say, you know what, we did this last time and that was kind of a mistake. So now we're going to sign him to an extension, to which people will say, wait a minute, isn't this Kirk again, the 12th best quarterback who couldn't win the big game? Like, right? So 10 is a very unique circle of hell, but probably a very entertaining season that at least would give them a chance to go into the playoffs and say, maybe.
Rumors swirling of Kevin O'Connell being traded to the Dallas Cowboys.
If I might
they
be
don't
convinced,
win the playoff game in Philadelphia.
Him being here is already spooky enough. Like, it's happened so many times, this exact same thing, and including that JJ had a knee injury at one point. Like, come on, right? If that happens, Manny, I will think that we're living in a simulation. I will think time is a flat circle, that the aliens that are making us dance on their puppet strings have made a mistake and forgot to type something into the Vikings algorithm or whatever. I've watched a lot of Twilight Zone in my life, and I'm going to be very creeped out if that ends up happening. But in all seriousness, 10 is tough.
Yeah, it's tricky because and I think honestly, Matthew, I think it's going to depend on if it's 10 wins, I think it's just going to depend on how Kyler Murray looks. If he looks okay, if he looks decent, solid, and they win 10 games, and some of those wins are, because the defense really had a strong performance and kind of carried the offense to a win, I think it makes the decision a little bit easier. But if Kyler Murray plays well and they just lose a couple of games that don't go their way, or if they lose a couple of games because he's injured and misses 2 games and McCarthy comes in and doesn't play really well. If Kyler has a really good season statistically and they make the playoffs and are competitive in that playoff game, I don't know how you go into 2027 without anticipating him continuing to be the starter. Now, the money and the contract will always be, a conversation there if that scenario plays out. But if they win 10 games, make the playoffs, and Kyler looks really well and plays really well, looks really good, I don't know how you look in another direction, because you're going to be in a tough spot in the draft. And if this class is, apologies, I keep bumping my mic. If this draft class is what we think it's going to be with all the quarterbacks, the Vikings in theory are not going to be in a position to take one of those guys. So you're going to be kind of in that tough spot of like, yeah, you're probably going to have to pay Kyler Murray, give him like a new 3-year contract, and you just play it out with him and you kind of see what happens from there.
It's very much like the Tampa Bay Bucks situation with Baker
Yeah.
Mayfield, where they won a playoff game against Philadelphia. He played really well I think the next week was Detroit, and they came up short and played good enough at least to be competitive, and they signed him. But what is interesting is that when it comes to quarterback contracts, the reason why it's not exactly like Kirk is that Kirk signed the most guarantee ever when he signed with the Vikings. And then it was extremely short extensions with a lot of the dollars guaranteed. And since then, there's been a correction by the NFL to create a middle class where Kyler Murray would sit in if it was a 10-win team. And we've seen teams win with the middle class quarterback that's not making $50 or $60 million per year. So it wouldn't be suddenly all hope is lost if you win 10 games and he's pretty good, but not perfect. You could still have an opportunity to succeed in the draft. The drafty bad man is gone, succeed in the draft, maybe actually stack some picks for once and see what you can do there. But it would put them in a spot that I think a lot of Vikings fans are wondering, how do you avoid that? How do you avoid ending up as a 9 or 10 win type of team that can truly compete for a Super Bowl? One more thing, Mr. Hill. Today, I attended a press conference with Adam Thielen and CJ Ham, who both announced their retirements. Now, this is particularly meaningful to me in this way. My first preseason game ever, when I arrived here, they had just opened up US Bank Stadium, and I was with our friend Judd Zulgad. First time ever in the stadium, first time ever covering a Minnesota Vikings home game. And CJ Ham had a huge game against the Rams as a preseason extra running back from Augustana. And that was, welcome to covering the Vikings with Teddy Bridgewater just getting hurt, and they're trading for Sam Bradford a couple days later, and it was crazy, right? And then Adam Thielen in 2016 has his breakout season. And it was one of my first big feature articles, and I know this has been written many times since, but one of my first big feature articles was going to Mankato and talking to people about Adam Thielen and his breakout game against the Houston Texans, where we started to realize that there is more there. And then both guys, I've been here for most of their entire careers. I know with Thielen it started a little bit earlier, but his breakout happens in 16. So it's essentially both of their entire careers. To see two guys who went from the practice squad, fought their way up, never stopped fighting for their spots. Adam Thielen's one of the most competitive people that I've ever been around, and an incredible wide receiver, especially in his prime, 2017, 2018, where it seemed like every week he's setting some sort of new franchise record for the Vikings. Not just a great story, but also a great player. Adam Thielen was a pleasure to watch and deal with. He was our Corey Stringer Award winner in 2017, which is the Media Good Guy Award. And then CJ Ham, You know how much fullbacks mean to me, Manny, and I tried not to take too much advantage of it because CJ is a guy that does not seek out the limelight, doesn't love doing interviews, things like that. We saw him come out of his shell a little bit more today, but he's not somebody that seeks out attention in any way. And I always had a lot of questions for the fullback. But what I really love about CJ Ham is selflessness. It goes hand in hand with being a fullback. You cannot be a fullback if you are not selfless, if you're not willing to take on every special teams job, ram your face into the face of linebackers coming at you. But here's what really tells you about why did the Vikings love CJ Ham so much? Why did they always keep him? Because when Kevin O'Connell asked CJ Ham to change his role and go from a key lead blocker under Gary Kubiak, Kevin Stefanski, that they used a ton in that outside zone system, to becoming a pass protecting specialist on third downs. This happened really in the 2023 season. You could see in the numbers where he starts to become their main pass protector. He became awesome at it and was one of the best pass protecting backs in the entire NFL. And that was something that he had basically never done before, and then became a weapon for them with other teams blitzing and pass rushers coming through in the 2023 game against San Francisco. He knocked down Nick Bosa a couple of times and helped on him and everything. I mean, he was able to take on a role that he had never done before, but this is one of the most intelligent football players that you are going to find, and he was able to do that. Anything he was ever asked to do, no matter how dirty, no matter how grimy, he was always there to do it and set an example for every player inside the locker room as a person, as a community. Both guys, Walter Payton Man of the Year award nominees. And then from a work ethic standpoint and a willingness to do just about anything, it was a pleasure for me to cover these two players. I hope that Vikings fans take a minute, whether it's on social media or whatever, to celebrate two great players. And I love the fact that they did their press conferences together. They're close, they're friends, their families are close. And Adam Thielen could have said, come on, man, I want my own day. I'm like Ring of Honor caliber type player. Put me. No, they wanted to do it together, which I think is really awesome.
It was really special, and I didn't get a chance. I did watch the press conference. I didn't get a chance to watch it in its entirety, but I think you could see the emotions with both of them about just how much it meant for them to have this opportunity. There are a lot of players in the NFL, but there are astronomically more players, athletes, football players who are really talented and have the aspirations to get to the NFL and just never get there. And for Adam Thielen and CJ Ham to sort of overcome being overlooked as players, going to Division II colleges and grinding their way into long careers, I think is just really incredible. And you mentioned it, both just great teammates, great leaders, great people. It's really special for me as a Vikings fan and somebody who's followed this team for pretty much my entire life. These are the guys you remember. You remember the big name guys, the superstars, and for their own reasons, but these are the guys too, the guys that are around for a long time, that really worked and grinded to become the players that they were and the people that they were. You don't forget those guys either. I think of like somebody like Chris Walsh back when I was a kid with the Vikings, and just special teams. He's a wide receiver, but he played primarily special teams, and he was one of the best like special teams players in the NFL in the mid to late 90s for the Vikings. Matthew Slater comes to mind too, like with the Patriots for a decade and a half of just like really good teammate, did all the little stuff on special teams, beloved in the locker room for them for a long time for that franchise. You just have such a huge appreciation for those types of guys. And Adam Thielen obviously became, at his peak was one of the elite wide receivers in the NFL. I mean, let's not forget that too, but really just, I think the people that they both are, Adam and CJ, I think just really, it's just been a great story, and I'm happy, just like you, I'm happy that they got to do this together. I think it was really, really cool.
It strikes to the root of one of the reasons that I love football enough to do it for a profession, is that so many players have gone to Georgia and Alabama and Ohio State and Michigan and had every opportunity in the world. And Augustana and Mankato guys beat them out. And, you had the story of the Bengals players kind of laughing at Adam Thielen during their joint practices and stuff like that. And then he becomes an excellent Pro Bowl wide receiver. And with CJ Ham, you just like to see great people get rewarded. And that's exactly what it is with CJ Ham, that the appreciation, he's had his moment here, because someone like that could sort of go quietly into the night and be a little bit forgotten with fans. But for Ham to have the moment at US Bank Stadium at the end of the season where they showed him on the big board, all the players gathered around him, like there is so much respect. And that's, from the outside, look, we're all playing armchair GM and armchair coach and all that sort of stuff. But do you really know ball or not? Do you really appreciate that player in the locker room that sets a standard for everyone, that will do whatever it takes, that fought like crazy and bled to be here on this field for 10 seasons? Just an amazing career for both guys, two of my absolute favorite players to cover. And I said to CJ, so I wrote an article about CJ being a pass protector. And, he's always, every time I ever went up to him, which was way too many times, he would always be like, oh, it's you again, asking me questions, And I was like, okay, because he actually retweeted it, and I don't see him do a whole lot of social media stuff. And I was like, okay, you got to give it to me, CJ. You liked that one, didn't you? You liked that a little bit. And he's like, oh, you did an okay job at it. So it's always a super, super humble person, a quiet guy, but both of them to the Minnesota community and to the Vikings organization gave every single ounce that they possibly could. So great respect for both of them in their retirement. All right, Manny, I don't know when you'll be back, but it'll be sometime. We'll have some stuff happen, I'm sure. We'll have a draft, and maybe we could do a pre-draft draft sim, or if there's some big moves, whenever they may come in the Vikings offseason. I guess you just never really know, but we will connect again very soon at some point, and then next week-ish into the week after that is owners meetings. We got something there, and then lead up to the draft. So a lot still going on here on the show. So I appreciate your time, sir. And we'll talk to y'all very soon.